And joining me right now is Kurt Volker, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO, former U.S. special representative for Ukraine negotiations. Welcome, Ambassador Volker.
Thank you for having me.
Ambassador Volker, I'll begin with my first question now. How has the ongoing war in Ukraine shaped the NATO?
Well, I think it has actually brought NATO together. There is a common understanding that this kind of aggression by Russia in Europe is dangerous for everybody. They have taken a lot of steps to reinforce NATO countries in the east, particularly the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, and they've also worked together to provide support to Ukraine as it defends itself against this Russian aggression. And so I think we've seen a lot more unity and a lot more common purpose in NATO than we've seen for many years.
And Ambassador Volker, Ukrainian city of Avdiivka has been captured by Russia. How do you see the war progressing from here on?
Yeah, it is not a terribly strategically significant change to the front lines. Avdiivka was kind of in a pocket that was protruding into an area that Russia already occupied. It kind of evens out the front line right now. Of course, it's a tragedy for the people that live there. I happen to have visited Avdiivka about 7 years ago, went to a school, saw some apartment buildings, met with the local government. And it's a tragedy for everyone who has lived there that this city is now also completely destroyed and occupied by Russia. But it doesn't change the course of the war.
Sure. Ambassador Volker, President Putin has said that he had no objections to Ukraine getting a NATO membership and would be ready for a ceasefire in the present status of territorial control. Is there a better option as the war gets into the third year on February 24th?
Well, so far, President Putin hasn't been serious about ending the war. They've continued to attack. They continue to have claims on parts of Ukrainian territory that they don't control. They continue to want to topple the government in Kyiv in favor of something that is pro-Russian. So we haven't seen a sincere intent from Russia yet to end the war. But if there is such a sincere intent and a willingness to withdraw forces, then I think it could be possible to negotiate a solution. At this stage, however, I just don't see Russia ready to do that.
And there has been a criticism of NATO and West's approach when it comes to the stance on Ukraine war vis-a-vis Israel war. Now, what is your view?
Yeah, well, I think the West has been slow in providing support to Ukraine, and they've also limited the types of assistance that they're providing. And I think that has cost lives in Ukraine. It has given Russia time to dig in very serious defensive lines in areas that it now occupies. And it, I think, has led to a longer war than it could have been. I think if we had acted faster to provide support to Ukraine, maybe it would have stopped Russia sooner.
And Ambassador Volker, where do you think, in your opinion, where does the post-2022 NATO stand in transatlantic relations?
Well, NATO is central to the transatlantic relationship. It is the means by which we commit to collective defense, and that has kept peace in Europe, at least as far as NATO allies are concerned, for 75 years. Because of that collective defense commitment, no one has dared to attack a NATO country. And I think that that will continue in the future. And I actually think that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, so will a few other remaining states in Europe that are not members. And that will lead to a longer and more stable peace in Europe in the years to come.
And what do you make of Republican frontrunner Donald Trump's stand on NATO and its role?
Well, he was bragging last week about how he threatened some NATO allies that he wouldn't defend them if they didn't pay their share of GDP toward defense, 2% of GDP toward defense. It's a very crude way to talk about allies and, frankly, not constructive to suggest that it's okay for countries to attack each other. But his purpose was to get NATO countries to spend more money, and he was taking credit for that. If he is elected as president again, I don't think we really know what his approach will be. He clearly still is concerned that the U.S. is doing too much compared to other NATO allies. But I don't think he'll be in a position to actually weaken or eliminate the U.S. commitment to NATO.
And Ambassador Volker, is there any timeline as to when Sweden will be able to join NATO?
The good news is that the Turkish parliament has already ratified Swedish NATO membership. The only holdout now is Hungary. I know that Sweden and Hungary have been in direct discussions, and the Prime Minister is planning to visit Hungary, and I would expect this to be resolved in the next several weeks.
And do you see U.S. taking on a more combative role in West Asia if there is an escalation?
I'm sorry, the U.S. taking a more combative role where?
If there is escalation in West Asia?
In West Asia?
Yeah.
Where exactly do you mean? In Iran?
No, in the spilling of the war between Israel, between Gaza and Hamas and Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is a risk that the war there could widen. Everyone is working very hard to avoid that. Israel, Lebanon, Iran, United States, everyone wants to avoid a wider regional war. But there remains a risk that it could get out of hand. The kinds of attacks that the Houthis have done, for example, against U.S. forces and others in the region have led to a direct U.S. response. They have now threatened to do even more. And of course, Iran is behind all of this. And so it does lead to the possibility of some more direct engagement with Iran in the future. I hope that that can be avoided, but it remains a risk.
Sure. And Ambassador Volker, will the ongoing war, as we were talking about it, in Gaza put an end to the normalization process between Israel and Arab countries like Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it, in the current phase, is extremely difficult for any Arab states to move closer to Israel. But in the long run, they share a common interest. They share an interest in a peaceful and developing Middle East region. They share a concern about Iran's hegemonic aspirations in the region and pushing back on that. So I think in the long run, they get back on track. It's just very difficult right now, given the situation in Gaza.
And what can be the role of the global South, led by India, in resolving crisis in Ukraine and Gaza, according to you?
Well, I think it's difficult because I think Israel is facing what it sees as an existential threat from Hamas that wants to eliminate Israel, and this fight will continue, and they will seek to eliminate Hamas. I think some of the things that the Global South has done and can continue to do are provide humanitarian support and assistance to the Palestinian people, to call for a peaceful solution, and also to reject the idea of terrorism or that it is legitimate in some way for countries to attack Israel simply because of its existence.
Ambassador Volker, on that note, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.